The Capitol Hill hearing room was a pressure cooker of politics and anticipation. Every sound, every breath seemed amplified by the marble walls and the high arched ceiling. Rows of dark mahogany desks stretched forward like a battlefield, each one occupied by lawmakers, aides, and advisors who carried the weight of political agendas on their shoulders. Above them, blinding white lights poured down from steel rigs, washing every face in an unforgiving glow. There was no place to hide here. The gallery was packed to the last seat. Staffers leaned forward, notepads ready, their pens twitching in restless hands. Reporters whispered to each other, their voices low but their eyes sharp and hungry for the next headline. Lobbyists sat perfectly still, reading the room like seasoned gamblers, their expressions giving nothing away. The air carried a faint smell of polished wood paper and the subtle metallic tang of nerves. From the back of the chamber came the relentless staccato of camera shutters. Click, 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 like distant gunfire echoing in an enclosed canyon. Each flash was a reminder every second here was being captured, dissected and archived for the nation to see. Whispers darted through the crowd like currents under a still surface. Eyes darted to the front, where the witness table sat under the bright glare, a stage where careers could be made or destroyed. Everyone knew the tension was real. Everyone felt it in their chest, and somewhere in that heavy electric air, there was the unshakable sense that something explosive was about to happen. The heavy oak doors swung open with a muted thud, and every head in the chamber turned. Jasmine Crockett stepped into the hearing room with the kind of presence that made the noise drop a notch without a single word spoken. Her black suit was razor-sharp, tailored to perfection, the crisp white blouse beneath catching the light in deliberate flashes. Her hair was neatly swept back, her steps measured and unhurried, each one a quiet declaration that she was in control of her pace, and by extension the room's. In her left hand she carried a slim yellow envelope. It looked almost weightless, yet the way her fingers gripped its edge told a different story. This was no ordinary piece of stationery. The envelope seemed to pulse in the air, an unspoken question hanging over its contents. The row of photographers at the back came alive, shutters snapping in rapid fire. Some staffers froze mid-note, their pens suspended in the air. Trump's allies in the gallery exchanged glances, some smirking, others narrowing their eyes. And at the witness table, Donald Trump himself leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips, as if to say, "Go ahead, show me what you've got." But Jasmine didn't look at him. Not yet. Her eyes scanned the room instead, left right back to the committee panel like a chess player surveying the board before making the opening move. Then with a calm that felt almost dangerous, she stepped toward her seat, the envelope still in her grasp, its yellow surface glowing under the harsh white lights. Across the table, Donald Trump sat like a man who believed the room already belonged to him. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his posture relaxed, too relaxed, like he was the only one not carrying the weight of the moment. The overhead lights caught the gleam of his cufflinks as he leaned back, one hand resting on the table, the other draped casually over the armrest. That trademark smirk curved across his face, the kind that seemed designed to provoke. Moments earlier, his voice had filled the chamber, loud, certain, and sharp as a blade, promising to sue Jasmine Crockett for $80 million. The number wasn't just a figure, it was a threat dressed as confidence, a way to say, "I can crush you if I choose." Some of his allies in the gallery chuckled under their breath, the sound just loud enough to reach the witness table. Others gave small, approving nods, as if the threat itself was the victory. Trump's gaze locked on Jasmine, now studying her like a poker player reading a tell. His fingers tapped once on the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. He didn't speak, but the air between them carried the echo of his last words, words meant to intimidate, to force her into silence before the real battle even began. But Jasmine's expression didn't change, not a flicker. The yellow envelope in her hand might as well have been a weapon in its sheath. In the room could feel it. The cameras found it first. A tight zoom on the yellow envelope in Jasmine Crockett's hand, the edges sharp under the glare of the overhead lights. It filled the monitors in the press gallery, erasing the rest of the scene until all that existed for viewers at home was paper and possibility. No one in the room knew exactly what was inside, but everyone could feel it like static in the air before a lightning strike. Staffers leaned forward instinctively, as if a better angle might give them answers. The reporters stopped scribbling and held their breath, waiting for the moment the flap would lift. Even the small hum of conversation that had been buzzing in the corners of the chamber faded into silence. Donald Trump's gaze flicked to the envelope for just half a second, quick enough to pretend it didn't matter, slow enough for every camera to catch it. The movement was subtle, but in a room charged with tension, it was like a drop of gasoline hitting open flame. The envelope didn't open. Not yet. In that restraint, Jasmine's calm, deliberate choice to let it sit there was its own kind of power. The audience didn't have answers, but they didn't need them. They could already feel the truth. Something big was about to happen. The smirk on Donald Trump's face widened, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. He leaned forward, one hand flat on the table, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, each syllable dripping with mockery. "You've made a career out of chasing headlines, but everyone here knows you have no real qualifications to question me." The words hung in the air, heavy with calculated insult. A ripple of laughter rose from the seats behind him, low, deliberate, the kind meant to humiliate. Several of his allies leaned back in their chairs, smirking, exchanging glances, as if they had already won whatever battle was about to be fought. One even shook his head slowly, chuckling under his breath, just loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. Trump's tone shifted into something even sharper, his eyes narrowing. "You're here because you think you can embarrass me, but the truth is you're out of your depth. And frankly, this committee deserves better." It was pure theater, the kind of public belittlement designed not to win an argument, but to crush an opponent's confidence before the fight even began. The insult wasn't just aimed at Jasmine, it was meant to echo in the headlines, to turn the room against her before she could say a single word in her own defense. But Jasmine didn't flinch, not even a blink. The yellow envelope remained in her hand, its weight suddenly symbolic, a quiet reminder that the real game had yet to start. Jasmine didn't rush to answer. She didn't fumble for papers or glance at her notes. Instead, she set the yellow envelope down on the table with slow, deliberate precision, the faint scrape of paper against wood cutting through the restless murmur of the chamber. Her eyes locked on Donald Trump's and stayed there, unblinking, unshaken. It wasn't a stare of anger, but of certainty, the kind that makes the other person feel as if they're already on trial. For a moment, the cameras forgot about the envelope and zoomed in on her face. No smirk, no nervous tick, just a stillness that spoke louder than any speech could. Around them, the air seemed to grow heavier. The laughter from Trump's allies faded into an uneasy quiet. A staffer in the second row shifted in their seat, the sound of fabric brushing against leather, oddly loud in the silence. Trump leaned back slightly as if to reclaim the upper hand, but her gaze didn't let him. It was a lock, and everyone in the room could feel it. Somewhere in the gallery, a photographer's shutter clicked once, capturing the frozen tableau, two adversaries, one envelope, in a silence thick enough to cut. The silence had stretched so long it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Then Jasmine leaned forward just slightly, and her voice cut through the air, calm but edged with steel. "You can sue me," she said, every word deliberate, "after you answer the question." The sound wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Her tone carried the weight of a gavel, striking wood, final, unquestionable. For a beat, nobody moved. Cameras froze in their tracks. Even the stenographer's fingers paused over the keys. From the back of the room came a sharp inhale, the kind people make when they know something historic has just been said. The smirk on Trump's face faltered, replaced by a tight, thin line. His allies didn't laugh this time. They exchanged uncertain glances, as if trying to decide whether this was still their fight to win. That one sentence had shifted the balance. Jasmine wasn't just defending herself. She was challenging him in front of the nation to face the truth he'd been trying to avoid. And now the whole room wanted to hear his answer. The next 43 seconds felt like an eternity. Nobody spoke. Nobody even dared to clear their throat. The faint hum of the overhead lights seemed louder now. Somewhere in the gallery, a chair creaked under shifting weight, the sound sharp in the silence. A cough threatened from the far corner, but died halfway, swallowed by the tension. Trump's hands rested on the table, but his fingers tapped slow, irregular, betraying a crack in his composure. Across from him, Jasmine sat perfectly still, her gaze never breaking her presence, filling the space like a storm cloud. The committee room, usually a place of chatter, whispers, and the occasional paper shuffle, now felt like a sealed vault. Every breath, every tiny movement was amplified, each tick of the second hand on the wall clock, hammering into the ears of those present. By the 25th second, beads of sweat formed at a temple in the second row. By the 40th, it was clear something had shifted and no one in the room would leave unchanged. Jasmine finally broke the silence. Her voice was calm, steady, almost too steady for a room this charged. "Let's begin," she said, turning slightly toward the clerk. "I'd like to call our first witness, Marcy Hill." The name landed like a stone in still water. From the far side of the room, a murmur rippled through the crowd. A few heads turned sharply toward the witness door, as if to confirm they'd heard right. Trump's jaw tightened. His attorneys exchanged quick glances, the kind that carried entire conversations in a fraction of a second. "This isn't good." Marcy Hill, a name tied to a trail of documents, whispered rumors, and late-night phone calls that some people in this room had hoped would never see daylight. Now it was about to unfold under the harsh glare of the committee lights. The bailiff moved to open the side door. Every camera lens in the room swung toward it, waiting to capture the first frame of the woman who might hold the key to everything. Marcy adjusted the microphone with trembling hands. Her voice at first was almost a whisper. It was the summer of 2005 she began. "I was 23, working as a house staffer at Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach home." The room instantly shifted. The mere mention of that name was like lighting a match in a room full of gasoline fumes, dangerous volatile. Marcy swallowed, hard eyes fixed on a point far beyond the committee walls, as if she were looking straight into the past. One night there was a gathering. Not a big party, not loud, just exclusive. Certain people arrived without being announced. Her hands tightened on the table. "I remember the heat that night, how the air felt heavy and salty from the ocean. I remember the smell of expensive cologne mixed with cigar smoke." She paused, her breathing uneven. "And I remember seeing a man in the hallway. The light was dim, but I could see his face. I froze because I knew that face. It looked exactly like Donald Trump." Gasps rippled across the room. Trump's head turned sharply toward her, his expression unreadable, but his fingers curled into fists on the table. Trump's face turned to stone. The confident smirk that had played on his lips just minutes ago was gone, replaced by a rigid mask. His hands, resting on the table, began to curl into tight fists, the knuckles whitened tendons straining under the skin. But he didn't interrupt. Not yet. For the first time since the hearing began, he seemed pinned. Every camera in the room caught it, the slow, deliberate blink, the way his jaw muscle flexed as if he were grinding down words he dared not say out loud. A bead of sweat formed near his temple, tracing a slow path down before disappearing into the collar of his suit. Jasmine sat motionless across from him, her eyes locked on his, refusing to give him a way out. Marcy's voice, though shaking, carried on. And Trump, whether by strategy or by shock, stayed silent, the tension in his body saying more than any denial ever could. The moment Marcy's words hit the air, the room erupted in whispers, gasps, and the frantic click of camera shutters. Reporters leaned over each other, thumbs flying across phone screens, typing faster than they could breathe. Within seconds, notifications began lighting up across the country. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Shad Epstein 2005, Trump in the hallway, Hajj committee shock. Screens in the press gallery lit up with trending charts surging upward. On Twitter, the clip of Marcy's statement was already being cut caption and shared thousands of times. Inside the room, the chaos was muted by the thick air of tension. Everyone knew they were watching a moment that would be replayed on every news cycle for weeks. Jasmine didn't move, Trump didn't speak. But outside, the story had already slipped from their control. By the time the committee paused for order, the internet was already on fire. Clips of the golden envelope resting on the polished oak table were looping endlessly on TikTok, each set to dramatic music and captions screaming 43 seconds of silence that shook America. On Twitter, users argued fiercely. Some called Jasmine a hero for standing her ground. Others demanded to know what was inside the envelope. Theories exploded: legal documents, DNA results, even a secret pardon. Facebook feeds lit up with still images. The envelope, Trump's frozen expression, Jasmine's locked stare. Every post had the same undercurrent. Something big is coming. Cable news anchors interrupted scheduled segments to run the footage. And in living rooms across the country, millions of viewers leaned forward, eyes glued to the screen, waiting for the reveal that could break the story wide open. By nightfall, the country had split into two loud, unshakable camps. On one side, Jasmine's supporters called her the only one brave enough to stand up to him. Talk radio hosts replayed her 43-second silence like it was a battle anthem, praising her composure as the ultimate act of defiance. Memes flooded Instagram, showing Jasmine as a modern-day David facing Goliath with Trump's face awkwardly pasted on the giant. On the other side, critics branded her a fraud and a political opportunist. Conspiracy blogs claimed the golden envelope was empty, a cheap stunt for the cameras. Cable pundits demanded an investigation into her fabricated drama, while hashtags like #Jasmine the Liar began trending alongside #Stand with Jasmine. The clash spilled offline, protesters and counter-protesters shouting outside the Capitol news crews, darting between them microphones catching snippets of rage and applause. What had started as one tense moment in a hearing room had now ignited a national shouting match, one that no one seemed able to turn down. By the next morning, a new weapon had entered the battlefield: edited video. On YouTube, a slickly produced clip began circulating. It showed Jasmine speaking at a rally 2 years ago, but the audio had been spliced so carefully that it now sounded like she was admitting to lying under oath. The caption read in bold red letters, "Confession caught on tape." Cable news ran it on loop. Talk show hosts smirked, calling her self-exposed. Even some who had stood with her started hesitating, unsure what to believe. Fact-checkers worked overtime, pointing out the mismatched lip movements and audio glitches. But the damage was done. The fake clip had already been shared millions of times, boosted by anonymous accounts and political operatives who knew exactly what they were doing. Jasmine's team called it a smear campaign, but in the war of perception, the truth was moving slower than the lie. That evening, the game flipped. Jasmine walked onto the set of a primetime news show, not flanked by her lawyers, not hiding behind statements, but looking straight into the camera. Her voice was steady, almost surgical. "They say I lied," she began, sliding a tablet across the desk. On screen, the infamous clip played, but this time she froze it frame by frame. She zoomed in on mismatched lip syncs, pointed out audio cuts that skipped milliseconds too quickly, and revealed time codes proving parts of the footage came from entirely different events. The host, usually quick to interrupt, stayed silent. Viewers at home watched the false narrative unravel in real time. The hashtag smear exposed began trending within minutes, overtaking the earlier slander. By the time she finished, the once dominant smear video had lost its sting, and Jasmine had reclaimed the narrative not as a victim, but as the one holding the receipts. 2 days later, the blow landed. Donald Trump's legal team strode into the federal courthouse in D.C., cameras chasing every step, and filed an $80 million defamation lawsuit against Jasmine Crockett. The complaint was thick, over 200 pages, accusing her of orchestrating a malicious smear campaign designed to destroy his reputation and political future. Cable networks went wall to wall. Anchors read excerpts of the filing, stressing the massive damages Trump claimed. Supporters framed it as justice, critics called it intimidation wrapped in legal paperwork. Outside the courthouse, Trump stood before a sea of microphones. "This isn't just about me," he declared. "This is about stopping lies that are poisoning our country." His tone was righteous, but his eyes, they burned with something else: anger, and maybe fear. For Jasmine, this wasn't just another media storm. It was a direct hit, one that could bankrupt her, silence her, and rewrite the story entirely if she lost. It wasn't just one lawsuit. Within weeks, Trump's legal team unleashed a barrage of procedural maneuvers, motions to dismiss her counterclaim, subpoenas for years of private emails, demands for irrelevant financial records, even depositions scheduled back-to-back for 12-hour days. The goal wasn't subtle. It was war by exhaustion. Every filing meant another day Jasmine had to pay her attorneys to respond. Every hearing drained her time, energy, and resources. Court documents piled up like sandbags against a flood, each stamped with cold black lettering. Some requests bordered on absurd, demanding the names of every person she'd spoken to in the last decade about Trump. Others felt like traps designed to twist her words under oath. Reporters called it a scorched earth legal strategy. To Jasmine, it felt like being forced to run a marathon in a minefield. The conference room felt like a command center in wartime. Maps of the legal battlefield, case timelines, media coverage, charts, donor graphs covered the walls. Jasmine sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, her voice steady despite the storm outside. "We're not just defending me," she said, eyes locking with each member of her team. "We're defending every whistleblower, every woman who's ever been silenced by money and power." Her lead attorney laid out the plan. Stop playing defense. File counterclaims. Subpoena Trump's own records. Use every court date as a public platform to expose what they called a pattern of intimidation. It was risky escalating, meant more legal fire, more sleepless nights, more public attacks. But something had shifted. This wasn't about surviving the lawsuit anymore. It was about turning it into Exhibit A in the case against abuse of power. The room had emptied for a break, but Jasmine stayed seated, her hands resting on the edge of the table. Outside, rain tapped against the window, a steady rhythm that pulled her back in time. She could almost hear her father's voice again, deep, calm, unshaken. If you see something wrong, you stand, even if they try to push you away. It wasn't just advice. It was the creed he had lived by, whether it meant calling out injustice in their small Texas town or standing between a neighbor and a corrupt sheriff. She remembered the way his jaw would set when he knew he was about to make someone powerful uncomfortable. Now it was her turn. Her father wasn't here to see it, but she knew every motion she filed, every question she asked, every second she refused to be silent was her standing in the storm, just as he had taught her. The golden envelope on the table caught a glint of light. She reached for it, not to hide it, but to hold it tighter. The courthouse felt like the eye of a storm, silent, but charged with an invisible force that could rip the walls apart at any second. Rows of polished wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators leaning forward, their eyes locked on the two figures at the front. On the left, Donald Trump sat with his legal team, his expression unreadable, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. On the right, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her notes, her golden envelope resting beside them like a loaded weapon no one could touch yet. The air was thick, as if the whole room was holding its breath. Even the ceiling fans seemed to turn slower blades, slicing through tension instead of air. In the back row, reporters' fingers hovered over keyboards, ready to explode into headlines. The judge entered robes, flowing gavel in hand. With one sharp crack of wood against wood, the trial began. When Jasmine rose from her seat, the creak of her chair sounded louder than it should have. She stepped toward the podium, slowly, deliberately, each step carrying the weight of the months she had endured. She didn't start with politics. She didn't start with names. She started with something simpler and harder to argue with. This isn't about left or right, she said, her voice steady but charged with emotion. It's about truth, and it's about justice. Two things that should never be for sale. She let the words hang in the air, giving them time to sink in. In the front row, a woman clutched her purse tighter. In the back, a man nodded slowly, almost involuntarily. We may disagree on 100 things in this room, Jasmine continued, but not on this. If the truth scares someone, it's because they're afraid of what it will reveal. Her eyes never left Trump's. It wasn't anger she projected, it was something sharper. Certainty. The courtroom felt like it had stopped breathing. The judge adjusted his glasses, looked down at the papers before him, then fixed his eyes on the two figures at the center of it all. In the matter of Trump versus Crockett, he began his voice even, but carrying the full authority of the bench, this court finds. He paused long enough for the entire room to lean forward. That the claims brought against the defendant are without merit. The evidence presented serves the public interest, and the truth, no matter how inconvenient, remains protected under the law. The words landed like a gavel before the actual gavel fell. The sound of wood striking wood echoed final and unshakable. Trump's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Cameras caught every flicker of his expression. Across the room, Jasmine exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just slightly, as if setting down a weight she had carried for far too long. From the gallery came a single clap, then another, and then the room erupted, not in chaos, but in something rare for a courtroom applause for the truth. The moment the gavel fell, the air inside the courtroom shattered into two worlds. On one side, Jasmine's supporters rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, others clapping and cheering, as if they had just witnessed history itself. Phones shot into the air, live streams, buzzing hashtags already surging across social media. For them, this wasn't just a legal win. It was proof that truth could still stand up to power. On the other side, Donald Trump remained seated for a beat too long, his face a mask of tension. His jaw clenched, his lips pressed into a thin line. Without a word, he stood, adjusted his suit jacket, and turned toward the exit. The usual swagger was gone. The cameras followed him relentlessly, capturing each step as if the silence itself told the story. Outside, the crowd roared louder, the sound chasing him all the way down the marble hallway. Outside the courthouse, the winter air bit at exposed skin, but the crowd didn't care. Hundreds of people pressed against the barricades, their voices rising in unison. Signs waved high above their heads, bold black letters, against white cardboard reading "No one above the law." The words weren't just painted, they were carved into the determination of every face there. Some chanted, others simply stood in silence, tears brimming, holding those signs like shields. Cameras panned over the scene, capturing the sea of fists in the air, the breath of the crowd turning into mist under the cold sunlight. This was no longer just about Jasmine Crockett or Donald Trump. It was about a promise that in this country, no matter how powerful you are, you answer to the truth. Under the glaring flash of cameras, Jasmine stepped toward Marcy. Neither woman said a word. No speeches, no rehearsed lines, just a quiet step into each other's arms. The embrace was firm, unshakable, the kind of hug that carries years of pain, defiance, and survival. Marcy's eyes closed tight, her chin trembling, while Jasmine's hand pressed gently against her back, as if promising, "You're not alone anymore." Cameras clicked like a drumbeat, each shot capturing the same image from 100 angles. Two women united in truth standing against the most powerful man in America. Within minutes, the photo flooded social media, hashtags exploding. Chatted "Justice Hug" and "Truth Wins." It wasn't just a moment, it was a message the entire nation could feel. The crowd's roar softened into a hush as Jasmine turned toward the nearest camera. Her eyes were steady, her breath even, but there was fire in her voice. "Silence protects power. Your voice protects justice." The words hung in the air like a bell's final chime, simple, unshakable, impossible to ignore. Some in the crowd wiped away tears. Others raised their phones higher, recording every second. Across the nation, people paused at kitchen tables, in office break rooms, in dimly lit living rooms to watch her speak. It wasn't just a statement. It was a challenge, a call to action, and for millions watching it was a promise that truth would not be buried in silence again. As the chants of the crowd echoed through the steps of the courthouse, Jasmine took one last glance at the sea of faces before her. Her voice dropped softer now, but sharper like a blade wrapped in velvet. "If it were you, would you dare to stand in those 43 defining seconds?" She didn't wait for an answer. She didn't need to. The question would live in their minds long after the cameras stopped rolling, lingering in kitchens, on late-night drives, and in quiet moments before sleep, demanding that each person face the truth about their own courage. Courage isn't about speaking when it's easy, it's about standing firm when every instinct tells you to stay silent. In life, there will be moments when the truth feels heavy, the opposition feels powerful, and the cost feels too high. But it's in those moments that your voice matters most, because silence protects the powerful and your voice protects justice. If this story moved you, imagine how many other truths are still hidden. Subscribe to our channel, turn on the notification bell, and stand with us as we expose injustice one story at a time. Your support keeps the light shining where others want darkness.